Welcome to the 20 March 2025 edition of Continental Commandery's Maritime History Virtual Lecture Series. I'm your host. I'm Fred Passman, the Commander General-elect of the Naval Order of the United States. Since we recorded our first program back in May of 2020, we've recorded presentations covering a number of Coast Guard, Marine Corps, Merchant Marine, and Navy topics. You can find all of our past presentations by visiting the past presentations page of the Commandery's website, and then visit our YouTube channel. Before introducing this evening's speaker, I'll just say a few words about the Naval Order of the United States. The Naval Order is our nation's oldest ancestral organization dedicated to maritime history. Our mission is to preserve, promote, and celebrate U.S. maritime history and camaraderie amongst our companions. Anyone who has served in one of our maritime services or is a direct descendant of a maritime service veteran is eligible to join the Naval Order. For more information, visit the NOAA's website at www.navalorder.org and select How to Join NOAA. Today's presentation is being recorded on YouTube and will be available for viewing immediately after the program is ended. Using the same link as you used to watch the program live, you can watch recording. During the program, you'll be able to post questions to the comments box. After Mr. Landry has completed his presentation, we'll have a question and answer period, and at that time, I'll share your questions with him. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. John Landry back to our series so he can present the second part of the lecture he started in November of 2024. John, welcome aboard.
Thank you. As we discussed earlier, I have the deck and the con.
Not yet. I haven't given you the deck and the con yet.
Okay, I stand by.
Just let everybody remind people that you're a native of Detroit and you were commissioned as an ensign back in 1962, a couple of minutes ago. You left active duty in 1965 and thereafter hung your architectural practice shingle in Detroit. Some years later, you moved out to California, and currently you are a member of the Midway Museum's docents team, which you've been doing since 2013. You're also a member of the museum's Speakers Bureau. All great stuff. And as I've mentioned in the past, I've been working hard to get you to become a companion of the Naval Order. and hope to succeed on that mission sooner rather than later. With that now, John, I am going to go off screen and give you the deck and the con so that you have as much time as possible to wrap up your discussion of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Thank you, Fred, and welcome everybody to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Just a little advanced information about the presentation. The first part is going to go over some things that I covered in part one, just to refresh our memory, and the rest of the presentation will be full of part two. Well, the slide you're looking at is our favorite ship, the USS Midway, parked at Navy Pier in San Diego, which you can see here. So welcome to the Cuban Missile Crisis, occurring primarily the last part of October, but all of the events leading up to it are very, very important and instructive as to why things happened as they did during the crisis. The blockade, of course, occurred in late October of '62, and for everyone, the Cuban Missile Crisis is a cautionary tale for all of us now living in the second nuclear age. This is a story of two nations saber-rattling weapons of unimaginable destruction, and of all the personalities who had their fingers on the trigger, to a thermonuclear annihilation, and most importantly, a story of unintended consequences which would have ended civilization as we know it today. This is the preface. Of course, 1960 to 62, both Eisenhower and Kennedy were intent on dethroning Castro. The crisis was the greatest mobilization since World War II. Keep in mind that we had very little communications between Washington and Moscow, some 4,800 miles away. There was no red phone. And remarkably, the embassy in Washington had no phone or radio communication with Moscow. Oddly enough, Western Union would show up or a courier. So communication was very difficult during a critical time in human history. We enjoyed the overwhelming strategic superiority in this 1962 period. As you can see, the data that's up here gave us first strike capability against Russia. Conversely, Russia had virtually no first strike missile capability in 1961, and Khrushchev chewed on that a lot. We had the superior naval force, especially our ASW forces, which you will see later in the presentation. We did not have the advantage of intel via satellite. It was U2 or RF-8 Crusader photographs and the USS Oxford electronic surveillance ship off the coast of Havana. And as probably most of us know, at that time, we were navigating globe using the stars. The Cuban Missile Crisis surely was geopolitical combat, and both Kennedy and Khrushchev wanted to avoid the horror of nuclear war. However, they were willing to walk right up to the edge of the thermonuclear abyss through the use of nuclear brinkmanship, which you will see throughout this presentation, risking unintended consequences. Every person and event on this slide had the opportunity to guide us critically into World War III and a nuclear exchange. Make no mistake, the Cuban Missile Crisis was a deadly turn of events, and it was spawned by 17 years of international game of nuclear chicken from the end of World War II. And finally, this was the most dangerous moment in all of human history. Well, in '59, Castro was triumphant, and 6 days later, President Eisenhower recognized him. The U.S. government recognized him and his government. However, 1 year later, aware that the United States had intentions of unthrowing him, Castro aligns with Russia. Later on, Kennedy gives permission for the Cuban rebel forces to attack Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. It was a CIA operation. It was a tactical and a strategic failure. And one day after the invasion, Khrushchev threatened the U.S. and Kennedy with a nuclear response. And you can see the right here, this is going to be a series of nuclear brinkmanships back and forth between Kennedy and Khrushchev throughout this presentation. In April '61, we installed the Jupiter missile in Turkey, and that was an event that Khrushchev himself seized this event with resentment and was a motivating factor for what he did in Cuba. And he had, at this point, once those missiles were in, he started thinking about how he could countermand the threat that he saw in Turkey. Late in 61, we get the first indication of missiles being constructed at Cuba through Rear Admiral O'Donnell. And he saw that construction just outside the naval base at Guantanamo. Unfortunately, for political reasons, Senator Keating, a Republican, got that same report and eventually raised all kinds of public and political heat on Kennedy. In 1962, in March, we, the U-2s, discovered the Russian SAM sites that were being installed in Cuba. 5 months later, in May, the Operation Andahir, that is the installation of nuclear missiles in Cuba, was approved by Khrushchev. Khrushchev believed that Kennedy was weak and would not react strongly to that move in Cuba. He gambled that he could pull this operation off in absolute secrecy, and his intent was to provide a first strike option for Russia, as well as defending the communist government of the Cuban Revolution. And that first strike capability would have been, as you see on this slide, 13 minutes to Washington, D.C. would have given Russia a first strike capability, which they did not have until they installed the missiles in Cuba. This is another recon photograph of activity of multiple SAM sites being installed in Cuba. General Power briefed the Pentagon, and the Pentagon pretty much brushed him off as not important to whether or not Cuba was going to eventually install medium-range ballistic missiles. Keating kept the pressure on Kennedy because he was getting inside reports of things happening, and Kennedy was not taking the kind of steps that Keating thought he should take. And Kennedy was under this kind of political pressure the entire Cuban event. Kennedy was cautious. He didn't want to get into a nuclear confrontation with Russia. So he was the guy with the slow hand on the trigger. He did publicly warn Khrushchev in September of 62, and in the same month, another nuclear brinkmanship back at the United States from Gromyko at the United Nations, saying an invasion or an attack on Cuba could mean war with Russia. Russia used 85 cargo ships to transport troops, supplies, aircraft, and military vehicles in 1962, all hoping to do this in secrecy. They came from 3 ports from the Arctic Sea, the Baltic, and the Black Sea, and had 85 cargo ships actually make multiple runs to provide this kind of equipment, these regiments, and 50,000 troops. And I might add that the CIA estimated the number of troops, Russian troops on Cuba, was about 8,000. So we didn't have the kind of intel that we needed at that point. The Russians also shipped 66 ballistic missiles, and as to warheads, they shipped warheads that were at least 1,000 times more powerful than that that we dropped on Hiroshima during World War II. It's important to note all of the Russian cargo ships were offloaded to Cuba prior to the U.S. setting the blockade, except for one ship, which we will see later in the presentation. Operation Comma was the operation to set up a submarine base in Cuba. That originated from the Arctic submarine bases above Norway, and they sent 4 submarines. The B designations are the designations that the Russians used. The C designations are our contact numbers that we gave these submarines as we pursued them with ASW forces. This is a picture of the Foxtrot diesel electric submarine that they sent south. It's worth noting that these submarines were designed for Arctic waters and had very little, if any, air conditioning. So when they got to the Caribbean, environmental conditions were severe for anyone in one of these subs. This is where they were going to establish their sub base, probably some 80 miles south of our sub base in Key West. And then on the 14th of October, we confirmed through YouTube photos that the Russians are building missile sites in Cuba. Kennedy, a couple of days later, Kennedy gets confirmation. He's now aware of the risk that the United States faces should those missiles become active. He calls for the very first XCOM meeting, of which there were 15 during this period of time, and asked when will those missiles be ready to be launched. McNamara was off the mark. He said that they hadn't, the warheads hadn't been arrived, but General Taylor was on top of the warhead delivery, and he made Kennedy sure that those missiles could be made ready, combat ready, very quickly. In conferring with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Kennedy heard them say the only sure way to overthrow Castro was to invade. So now it's a time for response. Kennedy calls his XCOM committee together, all the cabinet members, plus some special people like Ted Sorensen, who was a legal counsel, and Thompson was a Russian scholar. So they're going to deliberate for a while, and then after they deliberated on the first day, this is worthwhile noting, Kennedy went out to the Truman balcony with his brother and his attorney, Ted Sorensen, and he confided to them that Kennedy believes that we are very, very close to war. And this held heavily on Kennedy's mind throughout the entire ordeal. Well, Kennedy wasn't aware that on the 22nd, the very day he's going to give his speech, the Russians had one combat unit ready, one missile unit ready. This was the temperature in the Senate, and this is Senator Richard Russell wants to invade now. You know, go get them. And same thing with William Fulbright, the Democratic senator, invade now as soon as possible. So Kennedy's got to deal with this kind of political pressure throughout the entire Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy decides on a naval blockade, gives his speech, which we've all seen and heard, I believe, on Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. on television. That's the evening that my captain called myself and all our officers into the wardroom of our ship, turned the TV on, and said, "Gentlemen, we have orders to go and blockade Cuba." And above all, Kennedy wanted the blockade to be a political warning and not a military confrontation. And importantly, the Russian submarines, which were off the coast of the United States, were also listening to Kennedy. And they now are getting the impression that everyone, the United States and the Russians, are preparing for war. And this will come into play later on when we go to track down the submarines later on in the presentation. Joint Chiefs of Staff at this point set DEFCON 3. B-52 bombers are in air. And now it's time to blockade Cuba. We have the largest military mobilization since World War II. Besides the Navy forces, which we're concentrating on today, we had the Army, we had the Air Force, Marines, and this was a major, major operation. We set the quarantine lines 500 miles out from Guantanamo. Just for scale purposes, that's the same thing as the distance between San Diego and San Francisco. Our rules of engagement, our captains were authorized to fire before being fired upon should they believe they had a credible threat. The Russians were transporting military power, meaning the warheads, the nuclear warheads, more powerful than 3 times all the bombs that have ever been used in all of warfare. We activated Task Force 136, 183 Navy ships, a carrier force with the Enterprise and the Independence, and a destroyer cruiser group, 80 destroyers, 10 cruisers, and they all most of them were embarked out of the East Coast, Rhode Island, Norfolk, Charleston, Mayport, Florida, Everglades, Guantanamo, and then our ship was embarked out of Galveston, Texas. That is, my ship is the USS Wren DD 568 Fletcher class destroyer. And then we had a hunter-killer task group of 3 aircraft carriers, the Wasp, the Randolph, and the Essex. So on the 22nd, we're approaching completing our on-station with the carriers, and the same for the destroyers and cruisers. On the left there near Havana, that's where my ship, the Wren, was stationed right off the beach to the east of Havana, which is the assault beach for the Marines. And now we prepare to intercept the cargo ships. All the other ships had gotten to Cuba before we set the blockade, but now comes the Kimbosk. It has on board 6 R-14 missiles. And Khrushchev's given instructions to the captain of the ship. If it's approached by a boarding party, the captain's instructions are to open fire on the boarding party and to blow up the ship. The ship was rigged with explosives to accomplish that task. So now comes the Kimbosk in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. In the middle is a submarine B-130 that's escorting the Kimbosk. And as they approach the blockade line, the Essex is given orders to intercept the Kimbosk. The Essex itself will divert the submarine, and one of the destroyer escorts will intercept the Kimbosk at 10:30 hours on the 24th. This is a slide of the position of the ship on the 22nd of October. As it approaches closer and gets about 300 miles from the blockade line, at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 23rd, all ships turned around except the submarine, and the Kimbosk and the Gagarin head back to Russia. Well, Khrushchev, after receiving Kennedy's news about the blockade, decided that he would recall all the cargo ships carrying military hardware. He did not want to eventually slip into a nuclear confrontation with the United States. However, he gave orders to all his submarines to remain on station. And we now see 4 submarines. And this is the lineup of the 4 submarines that are in the vicinity of the blockade line. On the 23rd, McNamara gives the orders to the Navy to go out and force all the Russian submarines to surface with all of the ASW assets that we have at our disposal, and we had a formidable ASW capability at that time. On the 24th, we find our first submarine, B-130, about 500 miles south, using a P-5 Marlin Scout. And this is a picture of the actual diesel electric submarine. At the same time, we sent a notice back to the Russians, and we sent a notice to mariners that our signal for a submarine to surface was to drop 5 practice depth charges. And also we could send the code India Delta Kilo Charlie Alpha down to the submarine as notice to the submarine to surface. If the submarine did surface, of course, they proceed to the surface, and we wanted them to head at slow speed on easterly course. On the 24th, General Powers sets DEFCON 2, the first time in the U.S. history that we set DEFCON 2, one step short of nuclear war. B-52 bombers are steadily in the air, ready to attack. General Power broadcast the activation of DEFCON 2 in the clear. He didn't have prior authority to do that, but maybe they wanted to make sure that Khrushchev was well aware of what we were doing. Well, when Khrushchev did hear about DEFCON 2, he panicked. There's another term for that. It deals with dirty underwear, but we'll proceed from there. Khrushchev now believed that things were slipping out of control toward a nuclear war, and that is something that he would be unintended consequences for him. On October 26th, Kennedy moves one step closer to World War III. He authorized Operation Plan 316, which is the invasion of Cuba. And that attack would involve approximately 120,000 American troops. I've got Normandy invasion here up for comparison. We had about 150,000 in Normandy, so this is a major operation. Marines, Navy, Army paratroopers, Air Force. This was going to be a major assault on the island of Cuba. However, this is my ship, the Wren. We were tasked with gunfire support for the Marine landing, so at this time we were running about a mile off the beach, Tarara Beach, just east of Havana, to pick out our gunfire support targets and plot them on our charts. However, what we didn't know is that the Russians had deployed Frog lunar tactical nuclear weapons. This is a picture of it, and it was deployed in various locations on the island. And had we invaded, and what we didn't know is that the Guantanamo Naval Base was targeted with those tactical nuclear weapons, it would have been wiped out the first day of the invasion, and so would have been our invasion forces. They would have been attacked by these tactical nuclear weapons, which we did not know were on the island. October 27th is Black Saturday, the day the doomsday clock strikes 1 minute to midnight. The first thing that happens, we have one of our U-2 pilots stray through a navigational error over Russian airspace. He was there for about an hour and 30 minutes, but the Russians scrambled their jets, intent on taking them out. And we then scrambled our jets from Alaska and each one of our jets were armed with a GAR Falcon air-to-air nuclear missile. This is another confrontation miss because these are our F-102s, pretty cool looking aircraft. Because our U-2 pilot managed to get back to base in Alaska without a confrontation between our two fighter jets, Russian and American. The next thing that happens is that Major Anderson, flying a U-2 over Cuba, running in Operation Blue Moon, he gets shot down by a Russian SAM missile, and the command to fire that missile was given by a Cuban commander in violation of the Russian military orders. Another opportunity for things to go off the track, and this is definitely an unintended consequences of the event. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed and on our side, and we took a wait and see attitude. At this point, Castro sends a letter to Khrushchev urging Khrushchev to initiate a first strike against the United States in the event the United States does invade. This is the day that all Russian missiles are combat ready, all 42 missiles and warheads. So on October 22nd, the Navy embarks upon a mission to force all the Russian submarines to surface. The SW protocol for a diesel electric submarine search is to hunt them to exhaustion so that they have to come to surface to charge their batteries and ventilate. So we have 4 submarines, B-59, 130, B-36, B-4. We get the first order is given to, this slide shows you we have 2 of those submarines that are inside the blockade line on the 27th. The 100 killer task force comprised the Randolph that was had on board the SH-3 helicopters that were excellent for searching for submarines, and also our S-2 trackers with a magnetic anomaly tracker, stinger on the end of that plane that could detect big hunks of metal underneath the water. We had P-2V search planes with 4,000-mile range as part of our ASW asset. They could drop sonobuoys and help track a submarine contact. And then we had our ASROC weapon, which was a nuclear depth charge. There are 4 ASROC weapons on board a ASROC destroyer, in this case, the USS Kennedy. That one destroyer carries 80 kilotons of firepower. So we could go out, and if we had to attack the submarines, we could use this launcher. This is the Matchbox launcher, and you could elevate to the right position. And this is what it looks like when a ASROC depth charge, nuclear depth charge, explodes. I don't think we'd have too much trouble with the submarine at that point. What the Russians didn't know is that we had hydrophones planted all over the ocean and in the area of Cuba that could pick up the sounds of the submarines that were in the area, and we used that capability very effectively. So now we're going to go hunt to exhaustion, and we're going to go after B-59. And these are the 3 officers in B-59. Guy at the top is the chief of staff, Arkhipov. Savitsky is the captain, and Malenkov is the political officer who has to agree to the firing of a nuclear weapon. Uh, the boat had 22 torpedoes on board, 10 torpedo tubes, and a crew of 70. The Randolph was charged to go and find B-59, and it had 11 destroyers as escorts, and starts the search. And eventually on the 27th, they make contact with B-59, and the USS Coney, DD-508, is the first one to get an active sonar contact at 1642 on the 27th. And the destroyer brings in the other assets, the S-2 tracker, and our S-3H helicopter is dropping a hydrophone in the water, and the S-2 trackers dropping sonobuoys to also ping on the submarine. And another destroyer arrives, the Beale, and it starts dropping the PDC's practice depth charges to signal that the Russian submarines should surface. Now we have two destroyers on the target. The Coney comes in and does the same thing, dropping these practice depth charges. And they are quite loud. They're not dangerous, but they're very loud to the point that the crew inside the submarine is going to feel a lot of pain. It would be like banging on an oil drum to the occupants, the crew of the sub. So a little later in the evening, at 1900 hours, with us dropping more PDC charges, now we have the captain wondering whether he's under attack. We continue to aggressively pursue and contact B-59 with our S-2 trackers, and we continue to hit the submarine with active sonar. And now we've got 3 ships that have sonar contact with the submarine, and all 3 of them are pinging on the submarine. And we continuously drop these PDC practice depth charges, and at this point, the captain believes he's under attack. Captain Savitsky. So after 4 hours of this, the captain's fatigued, disoriented. His batteries are depleted. He has no communication with Moscow. His ventilation system is not working. The crew is fainting from heat exhaustion. Temperatures range from 110 to 140, 140 in the engine room. Carbon dioxide levels are reaching critical levels. So this boat is in bad shape. So Savitsky is confused and desperate, and he issues this command: get the torpedo number 1 ready. That happens to be a nuclear torpedo, which the United States did not know that all 4 of these submarines were armed with one T5 nuclear torpedo. And he says, we're going to blast them now. And these are direct quotes from officers who overheard the captain of the boat. We will perish ourselves, but we will sink them all. We will not disgrace our Navy. And now we are in the jaws of some pretty serious unintended consequences. However, Chief of Staff Arkhipov approaches the captain and says, no, we are not under attack. They want us to surface. So Arkhipov calms the captain down. However, the captain still needs to charge his batteries. He needs to ventilate the boat. So he needs to surface, which no submarine captain would want to do under duress, but he does. So now Captain Savitsky orders a surface. This is about almost 2100 hours. And this is where the boat is located in reference to the blockade line. So now the boat's surfaced and it's charging its batteries. And there are three people up in the conning tower, the captain, the chief of staff, and a signals officer who quickly, with flashing light, signals and identifies B-59 to the American ASW forces. However, we continue with the boat on the surface. We continue to aggressively pursue the boat with our T-2 trackers and our SH-3 helicopters and our 4 destroyers, one of them with a loudspeaker, others hitting the boat with sonar, another one training their gun mounts on the boat, and then the last one with high intensity floodlights trained on the boat, and also continuous PDC activity, loudspeaker commands for the captain of B-59 to stop your engines, and we are applying as much ASW pressure as we possibly can. And again, we command them to stop their engines. And just at this point, in comes a P2V and drops a 2 million candle incendiary flash bulb to activate the camera to take some pictures. Does it not once, but twice, but 3 times. And now Captain Savitsky believes World War III has started. Savitsky calls for an emergency dive. He goes down below, descends the ladder to the control room. He orders the special weapon to be loaded. He turns his boat towards the destroyer USS Coney. He opens his torpedo tubes. And Arkhipov tries to vacate the conning tower. However, the signals officer is halfway down the ladder, and he's, with his communications equipment, he gets stuck in the ladder. And how serendipitous is this when, while Arkhipov is still in the conning tower, he receives a flashing light message from the USS Coney. And that flashing light comes from the captain of that ship, Captain Morgan, who says, "I apologize for the incendiary flash from the P2V." Arkhipov calls the signals officer back up and signals back that the B-59 acknowledges the apology of Captain Morgan of the USS Coney. And then from the conning tower, Chief of Staff Arkhipov orders Savitsky to stop all action. He calms the captain down. Savitsky closes the torpedo doors and turns away from the Coney. And just as a side note, it would have taken all 3 of these officers for Savitsky to fire that weapon. We don't know what the political officer would have done at this point. So we have avoided another plunge into the thermonuclear abyss. All 4 of those submarines had T5 torpedoes. One submarine, about the equivalent of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. On the 28th, batteries fully charged, B-59 submerges, and now you know why I believe every person alive today should have a picture of this officer, Vasily Arkhipov, the Chief of Staff, on your nightstand. He has been called the man who saved the world, and now we all know why he carries that term. This B-59 incident was buried for 40 years. I'm going to go. Negotiations went on. Kennedy tried to negotiate on the 18th, didn't get anywhere. Khrushchev and Kennedy letters back and forth, and eventually Ambassador Dobrynin went off outside channels and got a KGB agent involved, and he delivers Khrushchev's message where he's willing to remove missiles as a promise not to invade. At the same time, we got Castro asking Khrushchev to deliver a first strike if we would invade. Khrushchev writes another letter adding on, remove the missiles from Turkey. And Kennedy says, no, we'll promise not to invade. We'll remove the Turkey missiles, or the missiles in Turkey sometime later. And then on the 28th, Russia publicly agrees to dismantle. And now the U.S. and Russia have ended the Cuban conflict on Sunday, October 28th. The exchange of the missiles in Turkey was kept a secret for 25 years. Kennedy lifts the quarantine on November 20th. We removed the missiles, the Jupiter missiles in Turkey in April of 63, but swapped those for Polaris missiles, Polaris submarines in the Mediterranean. And finally, you might wonder, both Kennedy and Khrushchev wanted to avoid the horror of nuclear war, yet both were willing to walk right up to the edge of the thermonuclear abyss, risking unintended consequences, which we now have been exposed to. What possessed them to take such a risk when mutually assured destruction was not dependent on the geography of Cuba? Finally, I might ask you, when did the Cuban Missile Crisis start? When did it end? Certainly, the Cuban Missile Crisis was the defining conflict of the Cold War, and the thermonuclear abyss was avoided 1 minute to midnight. Thank you very much, and I'll take questions.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. It's, people forget how tense things were back in April of 1962. It's easy to forget, but it was really quite an event. Early on in your presentation, John, you now I have to find my questions, my own notes on my questions. How was it that JFK was kept in the dark about the O'Donnell report initially? Is there any documentation about why it was kept from Kennedy?
The O'Donnell report was given to Keating surreptitiously, and Kennedy didn't know it. So it was a back channel. Somebody in the intel community, I believe, passed that report to Keating, and that's why. And eventually Kennedy found out, but for a period of time there, Keating had a full run at beating Kennedy over the head with information privy to him.
Yeah, it just seems strange that Keating would have access to it before Kennedy. When the U-2 pilot was shot down,
I don't think it was before. I think it was simultaneous. That was just the report got, surreptitiously sent to Keating.
Okay. When the U-2 pilot was shot down over Cuba, did he survive, or was he a prisoner of war? What was?
He was killed.
He was killed when he was shot down.
Yeah.
Before we went online air, you made an interesting comment about a memoir written by one of the officers aboard one of the other destroyers involved in the evolution. And just sharing with our readers, taskandpurpose.com/news/Cuban Missile Crisis Nuclear Torpedo. You can go to this URL, and there's a full account of a memoir written by one of the officers aboard one of the other ships. I believe it was
It would be the USS Coney.
Coney.
Mhm.
Right. So thank you for sharing that. That's I want to make sure people were aware of that. Let's see. I'm not seeing any questions coming in from our virtual viewers. Was Arkhipov, how was he treated back in the Soviet Union for his role in preventing World War III? Was he a hero of the Union, or was he pushed to a backwater for being a pansy? How did they treat him?
I'll answer. I did see some text on how the submariners in general were treated, and they were kind of pushed to the back of the classroom. I don't know why, but they didn't get a hero's welcome. It was ill-advised to send those submarines anyway. They weren't designed for warm waters. Submarine 130 had two of its three diesel engines wasn't working. Another submarine had a leaky hatch. I mean, it was not a pretty sight from the Russians' point of view.
By the way, I'm also streaming, and there's a banner below the way. For those that missed part one of your presentation, they can go to Continental Commandery's YouTube channel and watch it so that you can see part one now that you've seen part two. Well, that's it for my questions again. Oh, wait, I see one popped up. And from Bill Thomas, well, many thanks. So thank you, Bill, for that. Any questions about any of the material? This is, I say a fascinating time, but that's like the British used to talk about things being boring just before they were being wiped off the battlefield.
Yeah.
Fascinating is, pucker factor 8, pucker factor 9 at the time. I know when I moved from active duty to the NRF force, several of my sailors had been reactivated in '62, and this was now almost 12 years later. It's amazing how short a period 12 years seems now. Back then, it was half a lifetime for me.
I will say that from my standpoint on the Wren, we were going in 2 days. We were getting everything, all the ammunition, everything. As far as we were concerned, the 28th at 0500, we were going to open up.
Wow, and again, having spent a considerable amount of time plowing patties with 5-inch shells over in the Southwest Pacific.
Yes.
Doing the naval gunfire support role. It's amazing that you were going to be the Lone Rangers providing gunfire support to a Marine landing.
Yep, we were. That was our job.
I mean, I wonder if that reflects where we were with amphibious landing doctrine in 1962.
Yeah, I don't know. We were basically picking out anti-aircraft targets.
Right. Now, Bob Thompson, the commander, makes the observation, besides telling you it's a terrific presentation, he also made the point that during the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the U.S. only went to DEFCON 3, never got to DEFCON 2. Well, we're coming towards the top of the hour, and I want to let everybody know that we have another great presentation scheduled for next month on April 17th, when Mr. Barry Levine will present on the USS Indianapolis, A Story of Human Resilience. So do join us, mark your calendars for 17 April. We will again begin our presentation at 1900 hours Eastern Daylight Time, and hope you'll all join us at that time. And again, John, thank you for having joined us now for the fourth time, and we look forward to future lectures from you.
And I do too. It's always a pleasure. And anytime I can help you out, I will.
Excellent. Mark, take it away with the closing credits.